second year, we're going to be reading and then on the signature page, signing a Lake Garda Statement, in effect summarizing the work of the program this year and also our concerns for what it is that's taking place concerning the 500th anniversary of Luther. But I just wanted to introduce this to begin with by noting that it is often very difficult for academically minded people, academicians, to actually rouse themselves to move from a nuanced discussion of issues into something which is practical and active. I have a friend of mine who's a scholar, a Muslim, an Islamic scholar, and he finds himself self-censoring his discussion of Islam and of the Quran because the material that he has to relate is so absurd in many regards that he's afraid that it will not seem believable to people. And we've reached a point where, despite our attempts in a nuanced way through the vast bulk of what we've done these past 11 days, despite our nuanced attempt to present what it is that Luther and the consequences of Luther are all about, it's still oftentimes very difficult for us to really rouse ourselves to polemic and to action. And yet, I think you've seen over these last 11 days that there is a really tangible, horrific set of consequences to what comes out of Luther's teaching. The Roman Forum was founded by Professor Dietrich von Hildebrand, who is a man who is a great philosopher, and a man who nevertheless felt that he had to come out of the tower, the academic tower, in order to really fight. And he established the Roman Forum to fight for humanae vitae. But the great moment of the early Roman Forum was when the Novus Ordo was promulgated. And von Hildebrand, this great scholar, stood before perhaps 500 people at Fordham University in New York, and then in a rousing way denounced what it is that had been done and called us all to militant action. He stated clearly that he believed that the Novus Ordo was valid, but that it was horrific, and that we had to do everything in our power in order to be able to restore the traditional Mass. And it's in that spirit that we've decided over the past 2 years that we have to make it clear that we're not just living in some sort of pedagogical tower that doesn't take what we have to say out in the open, and as Sebastian just mentioned, really state the truth wherever the truth leads us. So it's in that spirit that I'm reading this statement, and I'm sorry that I have to bend over a good deal in order to read this, but it's very important, I think, and it summarizes what it is that we've been getting at the past 11 days. Our civilization is so sick that even the best efforts to prop up its few tottering remnants manifest the pathetic illness that has step by step brought the entire structure crumbling down. The disease in question is a willful, prideful, irrational, and ignorant obsession with freedom. But this is a malady that gained its initial effective entry into Christendom in union with the concept of the natural world as the realm of total depravity. It is crucially important that we recognize both the ultimate responsibility of this hideous, willful liberty for the destruction of our Christian and classical culture, as well as the role played by the idea that incarnated it historically in our midst. This is so for two reasons. The first is so that we can attempt seriously to rid ourselves of their monstrous influence over our own minds, souls, and bodies. The second is because a massive attempt to masquerade the truth regarding their real character and alliance is being mounted in conjunction with the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's devastating appearance on the public scene in 1517. And this for the sake of maintaining their nefarious impact upon believers and delivering the faith its coup de grace as a meaningful social force. 1517 is not the source of our woe, any more for that matter than was 1962 with the opening of Second Vatican Council. In both cases, spiritual, intellectual, political, and social diseases that had already hovered about the camp of the saints had gathered together, ready for injection into the lymphatic system of Catholic Christendom as one mega malady. All of these disorders ultimately reflected a revulsion over the need for the individual and his entire environment to be corrected, perfected, and transformed under the kingship of Christ, with the aid of faith, grace, reason on the one hand, and social authority, both supernatural and natural, on the other. Anyone in 1516 looking for a simple explanation for why he should reject these aids had available to him an embarrassment of errors from a myriad of sources, indicating that the only thing that really mattered was the individual and his willful feelings, and that relying upon these alone was the pathway to pleasing God. Nevertheless, the conflicted mind of the late Middle Ages clearly needed a figure with the talent and rhetorical venom of a Luther, effectively to inject this mega malady into Christendom. Christian man was too aware of the reality of sin to leap directly into an adulation of individual willfulness. Luther's concept of the total depravity of the individual in the world in which he lived gave every man the apparently pious excuse for succumbing to the obsession with liberty that was required. After all, total depravity seemed such a humble recognition of each believer's personal need to rely solely on God's grace to save him, for his need to affirm that freedom from enslavement to the despotism of the law that allowed him to avoid a supposedly hopeless and ultimately spiritually arrogant attempt to bend his individual, lifelong, workaday thoughts and actions into conformity with the commands of Christ. It proved to be quite easy over the course of a couple of generations for this negative definition of liberty, of freedom from the law, to be transformed in the Enlightenment into the means for a positive, new, and redemptive order of things. In short, it did not take long for a freedom from restraints upon the lawless individual willfulness of Luther's totally depraved mankind to be seen as the providential tool for molding unbridled human thoughts and actions into the building blocks of a new age of gold. In other words, the more that a freedom from restraints actually ensured that the truly sinful passions of mankind were all released in order to allow flawed individuals truly to become totally depraved, the more that same depravity was now looked upon as something intrinsically wonderful, good, and even pleasing to God. This development has assured, in the end, nothing other than the triumph of the strongest irrational and materialist wills. Sad to say, it seems absolutely certain that many of our ecclesiastical leaders are turning 2016-2017 into a year-long paean to the errors of Martin Luther and what the great English church historian Philip Hughes tell us lay behind them for centuries. And I quote Hughes, "What lay behind them were all those anti-intellectualist, anti-institutional forces, all the crude, backwoods, obscurantist theories bred of the degrading pride that comes with chosen ignorance, the pride of men ignorant because unable to be wise except through the wisdom of others." It is our duty as loyal Catholics to do three things. First, to steel ourselves against the contradictory, tragic, and self-destructive lies that this praise of Luther and company's hideous, irrational, willful principles and what Hughes calls their 500-year fling actually represent. Second, to hammer home the anti-Catholic and unnatural, spiritual and purely human misery these errors have caused. Finally, to beseech our Holy Father, the successor to St. Peter, the successor to the great popes of a valid and Catholic Reformation that fought against the horrors stemming from 1517, to beseech our Holy Father to abandon this misguided attempt to masquerade what Luther really wrought. For what he wrought, to appropriate a comment from the historian Richard Gawthorpe, was, quote, a Promethean lust for material power that serves as the deepest common drive behind all modern Western cultures. On this feast of Saints Cyril and Methodius, let us beg Saint Cyril and Methodius to pray for us. Thank you. Thank you very much. And with that, I thank you all for having made this what I think we can all agree has been the finest of these 24 Roman Forum Summer Symposiums. And after this, we'll just move to Vespers. Thank you.